Hello and welcome to this session on some useful pandas methods. Today we will be talking about the melt pandas method. We will start off by looking at the documentation for pandas melt. Uh, you can see that the pandas melt method is not applied on a data frame object, but the data frame object is actually passed as a parameter to the melt method. So what does the pandas melt method actually do? Well, it's used to unpivot a data frame. In simple terms, it takes multiple columns, turns them into row values, and eventually turns a wide table into a long one. What does that mean? Let's go back and take a look at a working example. So, moving to our example, let's say that we are looking at a data set containing students' marks for a few subjects. This is our original data frame before the melt operation has been applied. You can see that we have the student column and the subjects columns, maths, English and history. What happens after we have applied the melt operation? The original data frame is in a wider format. It has one row for each student and the values of the subjects or the scores of the subjects in that same row. After we have applied the melt method, what happens is that the subject column headers in the original data frame now become values of the rows in a column called subject. The values of the scores themselves are now unpacked and added into a column called the score, whereas the student column remains the same and the corresponding values of scores for Alice and Bob are displayed. You can see that the wide table or wide data frame has been converted into a long data frame. That is what we are doing here when we apply the melt method. Let's try it out with an example. This is our data frame with Alice and Bob's scores. Let's print them out to take a look at the original data frame. We can see that it's pretty straightforward. Alice and Bob with their scores for maths, English and history in 3 different columns. How will we now melt this and move it into a longer format? Let's call the new data frame the melted df. We will use pd.melt to run the melt operation. We will then pass it the relevant parameters. What are these parameters? id vars stands for the column which will remain the same in the eventual melted data frame. So we want the student column to remain the same. We will add student to id vars parameter. We have value vars. These are the columns which will eventually become the column headers which will eventually become the rows. So math, English and history. And you already know that the values within these columns in the original data frame also become values within each individual corresponding row. Var name is the parameter that denotes the name of the column header which will contain all the older columns as rows. So we will call it subject. Value name is the name of the column that will contain all the values themselves. We'll call this score. and that's it. Let's print out the result. This should probably take a few minutes, and we did not pass it the data frame itself, so let's do that as well. The data frame is called df, so let's pass that and run it again, and there we are. We now got a longer format of the original wider data frame. You may also observe that this is the reverse of a pivot operation. We had a pivoted table already in the wider format. We unpivoted it and basically got it in the longer format. So the melt operation is basically the opposite of a pivot operation. That's it for today's session. Thank you for joining.